Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to build an app that lets you track the price of Bitcoin in 3 different currencies, the US dollar, pounds, and euros. We will use various SwiftUI view components like TabView to build the interface of our app, and we will also use a data task publisher to obtain the data that we need from the CoinDesk API. So as you can see, I already have xcode open with a SwiftUI project. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new file. And this will be a Swift file. And I'm going to name it price details. So in this new file, we're going to define the model that will represent the price details that will be displayed in our app. And we're going to also define an enum that contains the 3 different currencies that our app will support. So in our price details file, let's first define an enum called currency. And our enum will have 3 cases. So we're going to have case USD for dollars, case GBP for pounds, and case EUR for euros. Now, we're also going to have 2 different variables in our currency enum. One will give us an icon for each of the currencies, and the other will give us a code for the currencies. So let's first add here var icon, which is a string. And we're going to do switch self. So for USD, we're going to return an emoji. So let's try and find the dollar emoji here. Let's see. Here we go. For the pounds case, we're going to return, let's see, return, and let's try to find the emoji. Also, I'm getting the emoji selector by pressing Control, Command, and Space on my computer. So we'll return the pounds emoji. And for euros, we're going to return the euro bill emoji. Now we're going to define something similar to get the code of each currency. So for US dollars, this will just be USD, everything uppercase. And for pounds, this will be GBP. For euro, this will be EUR. Great, so now let's actually add the price details structure to represent our model. So struct price details. And here we're going to have 2 fields. First, the currency that this struct contains. So this will be of type currency, which is what the enum that we just defined. And the other field will be the rate, or basically the price, the current price of Bitcoin. And we will represent these as a string. And now we're going to have an initializer here. So the initializer will take in the currency. And for the rate, so we will receive a string, which by default will just be an empty string. Sorry, we'll have a string with 2 dashes. And so now we can just assign our fields here. Self.rate equals to rate. So now that we defined our model, we're going to create a view model. Our view model will initially provide fake data before we actually obtain data from the API that we will use, which in this case is the CoinDesk API. So let's go ahead and add a new file. And we're going to name this file Bitcoin price view model. And in our view model, we're going to have to import Combine. And here is where we will define our view model. So this will be a class Bitcoin view model. and it will implement observable object. Implementing observable object will allow our view to be notified when changes occur in our view model, and so our view will be correctly updated. So in our view model, we're going to have two published properties. So the first one we're going to have is published public private set var last updated. This is a string, and initially this will just be an empty string, and this just represents the last time that our price data was updated. Then we're going to add another published property, and again, public private set var price details, and this will actually be an array of price details object. And initially what we're going to do is we're just going to initialize a list which contains the price details for the three currencies that our app supports. But like I mentioned earlier, the default value of the rate or the price will just be this string with two dashes. And that's the string that we will show before we actually get the actual price from the API. So here what we can do is currency dot all cases. Actually, to use all cases, let's go back to currency and make this case iterable. Okay, now we can do currency dot all cases dot map, and for each case we're going to initialize price details with the currency. We can use $0. Great. So now let's also add a method here. This will be a public method. So public func. We will call this on appear. And initially this method will be empty, but this is where we'll actually get the data from the API, and we will use this data to create or to update our price details list and show the price of Bitcoin in our view. So now that we have the skeleton of our view model, we're gonna go to our view and start implementing that. So let's first go to content view, and I'm actually going to rename content view, and I'm going to call it Bitcoin price view. I'm also going to get rid of the code for previous, and to rename that the content view, I'm just going to press command and then click here. I'm going to select rename. Okay, so it loaded, and I'm going to name this Bitcoin price view. I'm just going to press enter here. Perfect. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an extension for color. And here I'm going to define the color, a variation of the color green, which we're going to use throughout our app. So let's call this Bitcoin green. So static let Bitcoin green, which is of type color, and this is just color.green with an opacity of 0.9. Great. Before we work on the main view, which is Bitcoin price view, I'm going to define a view that will show the details of the price of Bitcoin. So I'm going to call this price details view, which is of type view. And of course, we're going to need to define the body. And when you create a price details view, you will need to provide a price details object. So let price details of type price details. Now in the body, the first thing I'm going to add is a z-stack. And inside this z-stack, I'm going to add first the color green or Bitcoin green that we just defined. And on top of the color, I'm going to add a V stack. In this V stack, first, I'm going to add the icon of the currency. So I'm going to add here a text that will contain price details.currency.icon. And this will have a font of large title. Then I'm going to add another text. And this text will have the string 1 Bitcoin equals, and we're going to make this bold, and we're going to give it a font of title 2. And then below that, I'm going to show the actual price of Bitcoin with along with its code. So let's add here another text, and in this text, we're going to add price details dot rate space price details dot currency dot code, and this will also be bold with a font of large title. And finally, we're going to make the foreground color of our view to be equal to white. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our main view, or our Bitcoin price view. And here we're going to have first 2 different fields. So let's see. The first field we're going to have is the view model. So let's add here at observed object var view model, which is of type Bitcoin price, or sorry, Bitcoin view model. Did we name it Bitcoin view model? We did. Okay, so and then the other field that we're going to have here is state private var, and this will be the selected currency, because our UI will let you switch the currency that you're viewing. And this is of type currency, and this will be initially equal to USD. And let's actually rename Bitcoin view model to Bitcoin price view model. That's what I intended and what I named the file. So let's just be consistent here. Okay, so now that we have these 2 fields, we're going to actually modify our view. So let's get rid of this text. And here we're going to add first a vertical stack, or V stack, which will have a spacing of 0. Okay. And now inside our V stack, the first thing that we're going to show is a text that contains when our data was last updated. So we're going to have here text with the string updated, and we're going to get the last updated date from our view model. So view model dot last updated. Our text will have some padding, and it will have padding on the top and the bottom. And its foreground color will be Bitcoin green. Great. Now we're going to have here a tab view, which will have a page tab view style. So basically, I call this a pager, so you can switch between pages in your view. And so here our tab view will need to know which tab is selected, and we're going to do that by basing the selection on the currently selected currency. Okay, and what we're going to do now is for each of our price details. So here for each view model dot price details dot indices. So we're going to access each of those with the index, where the ID will just be self, So it will just be the index itself. Now for each index, what we're going to do is we're going to get the details from our view model. So let details be equal to view model dot price details at index. And we're going to create here our price details view with the details. And we're going to give a tag to our details view, which is just details.currency. Okay. Finally, we're going to update the style of our tab view. So this will be tab view style, and this is page tab view style. Okay, before we continue, you can see that our Bitcoin price view, when it's created, it will receive a view model. So let's actually go to the Bitcoin price app file, and here we have to provide our view model. Okay, so let's go back to the view to continue adding some more UI elements. So below our tab view, we're going to add now another vertical stack. So let's add here vstack. And this will also have a spacing of 0. Now inside this vertical stack, we're going to have a picker, which will let you select a currency. And we will also have a button that will let you refresh the Bitcoin price data. So first, let's add here the picker. So the picker and the button will be contained within a horizontal stack. So hstack. And we're going to set alignment equal to center so that its content is centered vertically. And so first, let's add the picker. And again, this will need a binding to a selection, which in our case will be the currency or selected currency. And we need to use the $sign to provide a binding. And after the selection, we need to provide a label. And our label will just be a text with the string currency. After our label, we can provide our content. So let's add it here. So the content of our picker will be each of the currencies, and we'll use the icon and the code. So let's first add here text, and here we'll have, let's see, currency dot USD dot icon, and then space, and we will add again currency dot USD dot code, and we will also give it a tag, which will just be currency dot USD. And now we can copy and paste these because we're going to do the same for pounds and euros. We just have to modify this currency. So GBP, GBP, and GBP, and then we'll do the same for euros. Okay, and finally, what we're going to do is we're going to add some padding on the leading side of our picker. So now that we've added our picker, we're going to add a button that will let users refresh the price data. So still inside our horizontal stack below our picker, we're going to first add a spacer. And then we're going to add here a button. And the action of our button will just be to call viewModel.onAppear. And now the label will be, here we're going to have an image with a system name of arrow.clockwise. And we're going to give the image a font of large title. And we're going to add some padding on the trailing side of our button. Great. And now, finally, inside our vertical stack, but below our horizontal stack, we're going to add a link, which will link to the CoinDesk API website. This is just part of the API terms. If you use it, you must give credit to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a link that will say powered by CoinDesk. And let's see, the destination will be URL with a string, and here the string is https coindesk.com slash price slash Bitcoin, and we can force unwrap this URL, and we're going to give a font of caption to our link. And finally, we're going to update the foreground color. So below our vertical stack, or the second vertical stack that we have, we're going to add the foreground color modifier, and we will use Bitcoin green. And then on our whole vertical stack, or our main stack containing all of our subviews, we're going to add the onAppear modifier. And here we will just perform the action view model.onAppear. And finally, we're going to also update the picker style. And this will be menu picker style. Okay, perfect. So I think we have everything set up for our views. So let's go ahead and try to run our app. Okay, so you can see we have our UI and we have our different pages here. This is just a tab view with the page tab view style. And we also have our label here that says updated, but right now it's not showing anything because remember our view model just starts with an empty string for the last updated time. And we have our refresh button. We have our currency menu picker. So let's try and click that. And you can see we have our different options. So if you select, for example, euro, our page is updated. You can also just swipe on the pages and you can see that now the picker is updated with the new selection. And we have our link, which when clicked will go to the CoinDesk website. Okay, one thing I do want to do is add some padding on our this horizontal stack here. We see we have the button and the currency menu picker. I'm just gonna add some padding to the top there. So yeah, we're gonna go back to xcode and add some padding on our horizontal stack here. Just on the top. Let's run that again. Okay, that looks better. So since we're not using the API yet, we're not really fetching any data. You can see that we can't really see the price of Bitcoin. So now we're going to go back to Xcode and actually get the data from the CoinDesk API so that we can display it on our app. So let's go back and stop this, and we're going to add a new file where we'll set up our API service. So let's add a file, new file. This will be a Swift file, and I'm just going to call this file CoinDesk API service. Okay, and here we're going to define different structures that will represent the response that our API gives us. And we're also going to create the actual API service that will fetch the data from the URL. So let's actually go to a browser. So I'm going to use Chrome here, and we can go to the URL of the API, which is coindesk.com/coindesk-API. And if we scroll down, we can see this is the URL that we need to go to obtain the data. So let's go ahead and copy that. And this is a sample JSON response. You can see we have different data points. So we have first the time key, which has another dictionary that says updated, and then the last updated time. And we have, like the different rates. So BPI, or Bitcoin Price Index, is the key, and this has another dictionary that has the rate in US dollars, in pounds, and in euros. So let's copy this now, and we can see it better in a JSON viewer. So yeah, this makes it easier to see the structure. So we have our JSON, and we have the time dictionary, then we have BPI, and then we have USD, GBP, and euros. So we're going to define the structures for each of these dictionaries in our JSON response. So let's copy this URL again, and let's just have it here in xcode because we're going to use it very soon. But first, let's define the API response structures. So first, we're going to have a structure which will be called API price data, and this will be decodable. And in this structure, we're going to have code, which is a string, symbol, which is a string, rate, which is also a string, and description, again a string. So if we go back to the JSON viewer, we can see that these are some of the fields in our response. And we're actually only going to use the rate field. So we could even just remove these other three that we're not using, and Swift will still be able to decode the data. So for example, we can get rid of the description and code and symbol, since we don't need that. Let's add another structure, which will be called API Bitcoin Price Index, and this again is decodable. And here we're going to have the three different indices that we'll be getting. So we're going to have USD, and this is all caps, and this is of type API price data. We're going to add GBP, again of type API price data, and finally Euro, or EUR, API price data. So this just represents each of the currencies. So you can see we have our dictionary. The BPI dictionary itself includes USD, GBP, and euros as the keys to the price data. Now, again, in xcode, we're going to add another structure called API time, which is decodable. And here we'll have the key updated, which maps to a string. So this is just the time dictionary, and we're going to use the updated field, which will give us the last time the data was updated. Okay, finally, we're going to add another structure called API response. So this will just be the main response object that we're going to use. So again, decodable. And this response object has two fields. It has a time, which is of type API time, and it has a BPI, which is of type API price index, Bitcoin price index. Okay, so this will just wrap the whole JSON response, and it will get the time object and the BPI object. Great. So now that we have our structures defined to represent the response, we're going to define our service. And here we're going to have to import Combine again. Okay, and we're going to define the structure CoinDesk API service. We're going to have a public static variable or constant, which is called shared, and this will just be a shared instance of our service. So we can initialize here a CoinDesk API service object. And here we're going to have a single function, which will be called fetch Bitcoin price. And this function will return a publisher of type any publisher. And this any publisher will have an outcome of type API response. And if anything goes wrong, the failure case will just give an error. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and create our URL. So let URL be equal to URL with a string. And we have our URL here. Else, if we can't create the URL for some reason, we're going to create here an error, which will be a URL error of type bad URL, and we're going to return a fail publisher. So return fail, and the error that this fail publisher will return is the error that we just defined, and we're going to wrap this fail publisher into a any publisher object, since that's what our function should be returning. So in this case, this is the failure case, so we will return an any publisher with an error. Now, if we are able to create the URL, then we're going to use URL session to get the data and return a publisher with the API response. So let's add here a return statement, return URL session dot shared dot data task publisher, and this will be for URL. This is just the URL that we just created, and we're going to try to map the response into a API response object. So first, what we're going to do is call try map, and inside our try map, we're going to get a data and a response, because that's what our data task publisher will give us. So what we're going to try to do here is first, we're going to make sure that the response gives us no error. So first we can check guard let HTTP response be equal to response as HTTP URL response. Else, if we're not able to convert this to an HTTP URL response, we're going to throw an error, URL error, which is unknown. And now, if we are able to convert our response into an HTTP URL response, then we're going to make sure that the response has the code 200, which means that the data task was successful. So again, guard HTTP response dot status code is equal to 200. Else, if it's not 200, then something went wrong. And so we're going to try and get the code from this response. So let code be equal to URL error dot code with a raw value of HTTP response dot status code. And again, we're going to throw a URL error with this code. Now, if everything went well, that means our status code is equal to 200, then we can just return our data. Now that we have our data, we're going to decode it. And then the type is API response. So we say here API response.self, and the decoder that we want to use is a JSON decoder because that's the format that we've received our data in. We want to receive our data on the main thread, so we call receive on dispatch queue.main. And finally, we're going to wrap our data task publisher into the any publisher type. So that in this case, we're still going to be returning an any publisher, either with the response if we're able to get it, or with an error if something went wrong during the task. Great, so it looks like we have everything we need in our API service. So now we're going to go to our view model and update that so that we actually get the data from the API and provide it to our view. So let's open the Bitcoin price view model file. And what we're going to do is first, we're going to define a variable that will hold a subscription to our publisher. So this will be private var subscription. And this will be of type any cancelable, and the variable will be optional. And now we're going to update our onAppear method. So what we're going to do here is we're going to assign our subscription variable. And this is where we're going to call the CoinDesk API service. So this will be equal to CoinDesk API service dot shared dot fetch Bitcoin price. And remember, fetch Bitcoin price will return any publisher that will have an API response for the outcome and an error in the failure case. So now that we have our fetch Bitcoin price call, we're going to use the sync method, and sync has two parameters. First, it needs a completion, and then or a receive completion that is called when the publisher is returned. And then we have a receive value that will give us the value, if any, because remember, there could be an error in our data task, which in this case will be of type API response. So the receive completion is called when our data task publisher is done, or our URL session data task is done. And we're going to have here the completion parameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch on the value of the completion. The completion could either be a failure, so case dot failure, and this will give us an error. And if we have an error, what we're going to do right now is just print the error's description, localized description. And in the case that the task actually finishes or finished, we're just going to print success. So this is just for us to see. Now in the receive value, if everything goes well in our data task, we're going to get the API response object. So what we're going to do here is we need a reference to self. So this could be a weak reference, so weak self, and then our value or our receive value in. First, we're going to make sure that we have a reference to self. So Gartlet self equals self else return. And if we're able to get a reference to self, then we're going to update the last updated variable, and we can get that from the API response. So value dot time dot updated, And finally, we're going to update our price details array. So we will create a new array here, and we're going to create 3 different price details objects, one for each of the currencies. So currency.usd, and the rate we can get from our value.bpi.usd.rate. And we can copy and paste these and do the same for the other 2 rates. So GBP and euros. Okay. Perfect. So now we have a subscription to our data task publisher. When the completion is called, we check to see whether there was a failure or whether our tasks finished successfully. And when we get our value, we update our published properties, which means that our view or our UI will be updated with these new values. So let's go ahead and run our app again and see if everything's working correctly. Great, so as you can see, we can now actually see the price of 1 Bitcoin. So at the moment, 1 Bitcoin is equal to 45,508 US dollars. And we can swipe and see the price in pounds and euros. And again, we can use our picker to change the currency that we're seeing. And now we also have the updated time. So it was last updated on August 11, 2021 at 3:44 UTC time. And we can also press the refresh button, and we should be able to get the most up-to-date data. So let's see if it actually changes. Okay, so it changed a little bit, and you can see that our updated time is now a minute past the last time, so now 3:45 UTC time. Great, so that's all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something new. Today's actually 1 year since I started my YouTube channel, so make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos very soon.